Okay, today we're here to talk about the dungeons, and my name is Mix. I'm here with Ellesmere, Nerf, and Tettles. We're going to make a tier list for the new dungeons, starting with one of the new dungeons, not one of the old ones that did come back, and it's going to be Brackenhide first. Anyone that wants to jump on that one?
Dude, people thought this dungeon was gonna suck, but this dungeon has like low-key been pretty good this season, yeah?
Yeah, it's
Yes.
been pretty good.
But I think the biggest reason it's been good is just because the timer is insanely forgiving. I still think there's a lot of rather obnoxious mechanics in the actual dungeon that makes it not super fun to play.
Yeah.
It's also very long still, so
Checkpoints in here
I
also
think that always
are...
kind of counts against the dungeon.
Yeah, checkpoints are pretty bad in this dungeon, I would say, generally. Nerf, there's some weird stuff with the count in here, right? Like, people are getting count from mobs that they probably shouldn't.
Yeah, the trees give count for their summon lashers. Whenever they fix that, people might change their perception of the dungeon when you have to kill more. But I think a big reason people like the dungeon is it's like a lot of AoE. It's kind of like Algathar 2.0 with like a lot of AoE. People like to do AoE in big numbers. I think
Also,
that's fun.
I feel like the dungeon's enjoyment varies greatly whether you're playing in a pug and also based on your route, because I have gone left after the first boss in a pug before, and let me tell you, I did not enjoy that dungeon one bit.
Dude, I've never gone left.
Sounds reasonable.
I've never
I've gone left when it was M0, when you were doing M0 when Ascension first came out.
Yeah, I did it on like a 19, and you do not want to go there, trust me.
So what's over there? It's like a trash gauntlet, right?
Oh yeah, it's a
Yeah.
trash gauntlet, and everything kills you. And like
It's like very
just
horrible trash.
the aggro's all over the place, and all the trash is miserable. Yeah, don't go left as a PSA.
I think that I'm leaning towards like
Okay.
A or B is where I would put this
Yeah, I
personally.
would have said like from everything you said, I would have said like a B plus maybe.
What are the demerits? It's like shitty checkpoint, really long runs across the whole entire dungeon. Like Ellesmere said, there's still some stuff that's problematic with the dungeon itself.
Count wise.
And the disease dispels are very obnoxious. But overall, I would say like because the timer is so forgiving, most people are going to find that this dungeon is like around the A tier, because like you're generally always going to be able to chest it, which is, the biggest, most important thing. Is like it's always frustrating when you deplete, and this dungeon is super forgiving in terms of that. So
Mhm.
I would give it a little bump for that reason alone.
Nerf, would you say A or B?
I would say low A. High B
Low
works
A.
too. Somewhere around there.
Yeah.
Okay, so we kind of need to. I can't put it in between.
I'll put
so
it.
we need to
We'll put it
agree
in
on-
A. This is definitely one of the
A.
better dungeons
Yeah, I
this
think it's
season.
A. I
Still
think
bump it
belongs
down.
in A.
Yeah. Do you like
Alright.
the Do you like the first area trash in there, Nerf?
No, I don't.
I don't either.
Well, I just don't like trash that does the whole running away thing.
The fleeing
Yes.
whenever they're low.
To be
Yeah.
fair,
Yeah.
as a DK, you kind of feel validated by that. So it's like, I'm doing something, it's helping the group, lots of grips, woohoo. But yeah, it's not super fun for anyone else. Okay, we'll leave it at A for now, and we're gonna hop on over to the next dungeon, which is going to be, I want to say, a fan favorite. Like everybody loves this dungeon, has always loved it. Now it comes with some changes. Freehold now, for example, you can't skip that last group anymore. It's tied in with the boss, which I thought was so strange because it was very common to skip it. But where would you rate it now that it's back?
I would
thi-
say it's still A.
I think it's the best
Yes.
dungeon of the season.
I wouldn't say that. I would say high A. I think a lot of the changes they made were good, but I also think there is some merit to a dungeon being too simple, I guess I would say. Like, there's not really much to Freehold,
Yeah.
None of the trash does that much. None of the bosses really have that many mechanics, especially with the two bosses that are active. I don't know. It just feels like it, and Trothak is still kind of buggy and not a fun fight to play.
Fair.
I mean,
I'd
the trash
say-
doesn't do a lot, but it still does a lot of damage, right?
It-
They
it
don't have like
does-
a ton of mechanics compared to some of the other dungeons, but
Yeah,
they still do a lot of damage, which I think is fine.
I think it's fine. I don't know. Something about it just feels a little lackluster compared to some of the other dungeons.
think-
but
do you
maybe
think
that
that's,
might be a good thing.
Do you think it's a healer
Yeah.
thing? I think that like from a DPS perspective, I actually still think this dungeon is super sick. In regards to like the pulls
Yeah.
you're doing in this dungeon still feel pretty good. I think that once people start cannonball barraging the some of the like last packs of trash. Like this is going to be a thing at the high end. I think that dungeon still has a lot of breathing room in terms of what can and will be done as the season
Yeah.
goes on.
You're probably right that I'm a bit jaded because I'm a healer. So like, there's not really much to do as a healer in this dungeon. Like you have the one Shattering Bellow from the Enforcers in the first area, and then like P1 of the first boss. And then after that, it's like pretty much nothing because Eudora doesn't really hit that hard in comparison because they nerfed her. And Trothak is just me kiting around sharks for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Last
I
boss
think
is the one thing that they
especially,
did
like-
actually buff a fair amount for healers, which I did enjoy. But like seeing as that's really the only thing for healers in that dungeon, basically, yeah, I guess it's a little boring from a healer perspective.
I think especially as like a melee healer, you're having like even less fun in that dungeon because like you're saying, you have to kite like so much, you can't go close in many scenarios. Like even as just a melee DPS, I'm often like, well, you know, I can't stand in that. I have to dodge out of this. It's like, I'm still here, but I'm very curious. I don't know if we should like get ahead of ourselves, but you said it's not your like highest rated dungeon in this season. Which one would you say is better?
We'll get to that.
Okay.
No
All
leaks,
right.
no leaks.
So
wait,
No
hold
leaks,
on.
yeah.
Hold on.
yeah, that's what I'm asking.
We got to get the nerf perspective. I mean, this dungeon actually beats up your tank pretty hard, yeah?
Yeah, it actually does a lot of tank damage. Like the thing before, you just don't really notice it in BFA when you play Prot Warrior and it just blocked everything, and you could like kite with the root stun from the Conflict and Strife. But yeah, it does a lot of damage, for sure.
Do you like it?
So where would you rate it?
I would say it's A. I think it's still fun to play.
All right. I think we're pretty much all in agreement. So we're gonna go into A.
It's my favorite
Um,
dungeon aesthetically, if that counts for anything.
I think it counts, yeah. So next up is another one of the new dungeons. Got a taste of it at the beginning of Dragonflight. It's now back the Halls of Infusion. I generally, when I hear like halls in a dungeon, I always think of like you can go really big, AoE, it's gonna be fun, short dungeon, and Halls of Infusion is just none of that.
I think for me, Halls is like, there are some parts about it that I love, and then there are other parts about it that I absolutely hate. I think a lot of it is fun, but there are some things that like make the dungeon so much easier that your comp really dictates how fun this dungeon is. For example, like for healers, if you have a Shadow Priest in your group, Mass Dispel is huge in this dungeon between first boss and the Frost Drakes that do just a massive amount of ticking damage. Having a Mass Dispel makes your life infinitely easier. And then also having slows. Like if you have a comp that doesn't really have any slows, the whole like small frog area, whether you do the gauntlet or the boss or whatever it is, like it's miserable without slows. So I think comp dictates a lot of the enjoyment of this dungeon, at least for me. The biggest downsides of this dungeon are the containment apparatuses in the first area.
Yeah.
I think they
Oh yes.
if you gave them an ICD on their ability so that they couldn't just spam cast it, I think this dungeon would become a lot more fun. But as is, those things are awful.
I find the first area to be an abomination. In addition to that, I think the checkpoint system in here is criminally awful. Like there is no
Yes.
there is
Agreed.
no way that it should be like that. I mean, I think that those two things together, on top of that, I feel like I'm just like lulled to sleep with how long this dungeon realistically is. I think that this is one of my least favorite dungeons this season. I know that Ellesmere maybe had it in somewhere in the middle, but I do not like this key.
Yeah, I think I agree. I do not like the key either. Like the orbs, the frogs, and there's like the random casters by the dragon trash that do a lot of damage, tank damage that you can't kick, so you have to stop. The last boss is not fun with the long intermissions. It is.
I also think the gauntlet, the waves just happen too often.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't like some of where the difficulty is in this key. I just don't really find it fun because a lot of it is, first off, you have a Mass Dispel check for the first boss and for the dragons. And then beyond that, like a lot of it's in the containment apparatus or the inundate cast at the very end of the dungeon. I'm like, this is so stupid.
Also, I'm not sure if we're factoring that in, but there's a lot of bugs in this one in particular from my experience. Like there's so much evading and like weird movement where mobs get stuck on places.
Really?
You're like, huh? Yeah.
I haven't actually experienced that a lot.
I'm trying to
Really?
think.
For example, the ice boss, she can glitch onto one of
Oh.
her like ice things, and it's
I
just
have
like, yeah,
seen
she
that.
evades up there.
Wait, really?
Yeah, it's not fun. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Yes,
I
I
haven't
saw
seen
a clip
that,
of
but
that.
I heard
But
about it.
there's similar thing. I have a clip of it. I'll show you later. But yeah, it's like there's several things where this happens just because of like different levels of where things can stand with the dragons, for example. It's just makes me angry. But yeah,
I think
that's obviously like a game-sided thing.
ranking wise, I'd put this probably in C or D. I think that there is ways that they could actually make this dungeon a lot better if they change the difficulty at the beginning of the trash and change some of the
Yeah.
checkpoints. But I think with the current system of checkpoints, dungeon's kind of miserable.
I think if you were to give containment apparatus an ICD,
Yeah,
reduce the duration of the dots from both the frost dragon and the first boss, and then increase the distance between waves
yeah.
in the gauntlet, and decrease the inundate damage, and then make the frogs move slower. Do all of those things, and I'll put this dungeon in B. But as is, I would say it's probably a D.
I don't think this dungeon can be.
Change the entire dungeon.
I just
then
don't.
it's good.
It just can only be so good, right? Like the dungeon can ultimately only be so good because of, first off, how long it is, and second off, like how you have to pull the trash packs in here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
I also don't necessarily like the boss mechanics. Like, I think they're not that fun when I compare them to some of the other dungeons. They kind of give me like it's same as like the shark boss in Freehold. It feels like just you do them and you're like, oh yeah, whatever. But it's a lot of just like not fun mechanics. So
Yeah, the ice boss is kind of satisfying.
When it doesn't glitch out, yeah.
When it doesn't, I mean, I've only seen that happen once, and it was on a VOD.
Yeah.
I've never
Yeah.
experienced that myself, but yeah, that is wild if it happens.
Okay, so we're currently discussing whether it's C or D, right?
I'd probably say D.
Probably say D.
I
Yeah.
would agree D.
All right, it goes in D. We got our bottom of the tier list tier dungeon. Okay, next up, I know they look the same, but we're going to talk about Neltharion's Lair first. So another one of the older dungeons coming back here. How are we feeling about this one?
I think the trash does too much damage compared to the other dungeons.
Timer's free.
From start to beginning. Yeah, the timer is free. Like, I mean, I think that's a trend with a lot of the dungeons this season, right? The timer just feels free, but it's stuff that can kill you.
Yeah.
We brought it up in the last video, I think, but what Nerf was talking about with Rockmora, like first boss, you should not take a second tick of damage from when you're getting knocked back, because
Yeah.
right now, like it's basically just a one shot at higher key levels unless you coordinate defensives or like
Mm-hmm.
get that heal in that 0.2 second between the two ticks
Or you're
on the
staying,
entire group.
or you're staying flush against the wall. There's like a
Yeah, or you're
Really
just
annoying.
outranging. Yeah.
Yeah.
I also think that the third boss, Neuraxis, is still too punishing, especially for groups that don't have poison dispels. It's very brutal between like the rock throwers. Like if there weren't rock throwers, it would be fine, I think. But when you add the rock throwers on top of the Rancid Maw and the Toxic Wretch all going out at like the same time, there's just too much potential for one shots happening on that boss. And not all of it can be avoided by the healer.
I do generally think that the trash is a bit hard. I do agree with that, but I actually find the relative difficulty of this dungeon to be fun because it does feel challenging in a lot of different areas, right? It feels like it's like a more complete dungeon as opposed to some of the dungeons that I feel like I'm just like asleep during.
Yeah, I think it's just a different style of dungeon rather
Yeah.
than just like, walking in and pulling a million mobs and, fucking using CC and stuff to be able to manage these huge pulls. You kind of just have to play this place pack by pack. And
you
if you
play
do,
it like
Yeah.
a classic dungeon where you're fighting one mob at a time and you're seeing another mob.
yeah. And I think that, like, I don't know, personally, I don't really enjoy that. But I think that that's kind of what they were going for with the difficulty of this trash, or at least I assume. Especially, with like the Pelters specifically, that just do an unreasonable amount of damage if you have two of them active on any sort of high key level because their Jagged Disc doesn't have an ICD. Kind of same issue as Containment Apparatus. When you have an ability that can be spammed with no ICD and it just does huge amounts of damage, it's going to be a problem. It's not going to be very fun to play. There's not much counterplay to it, you know, aside from just CCing a mob.
Yeah, that's always kind of the issue, right? Like with the very first boss, like Chell said, you can like go against the wall as a melee, for example, because otherwise you're going to be out of range and you'll be fine there. But if there's just so much damage coming in like a short amount of time that it's basically not outplayable, you just have to be lucky or CC it. I always feel like that's not good. That's not something I enjoy.
I will say, I like the aesthetics of this dungeon too. I like the boat ride. Although I don't like that you can cheese the first area with the like pre-timer jumping thing.
Okay, just start us at the bottom, man. Why make us jump in the
No,
water?
no, no. I agree. I agree. You should
Oh.
start at the bottom. I just don't like that like the groups that know how to do that get like a 20-second head start, you know?
Was this like a B?
Yeah, I'd probably say B.
I would
Would
say
you agree?
C.
Oh, you don't like it? Okay, interesting.
No, I don't like it.
Settles, you would also say B?
I'm fine with a C.
I'm willing to concede a C here. I think
I was borderline B and C anyways.
this is one. This is actually one of my more favorite dungeons this season, but I'm willing to concede a C. I think it's fine.
All right, we'll put it in C. We'll see.
Criticisms are
How it
valid at that key.
Yeah.
I normally rank things off
I-
vibes and how much I enjoy playing it.
That checks out. I think that's also kind of valid, but the criticism, like you said, is fair. So we'll leave it in the C category, and we're going to go to its brother dungeon, which is also in this season, and it's Neltharis. Now, also a red fiery dragon dungeon, but I actually like this one a lot more. I'm curious what you guys think.
With this chain shit that's going on
No.
right now, I absolutely hate this key. I think that
Yeah, I don't know why they made that change.
Yeah.
It's so weird.
So for those who don't know, basically the dragon chains, you're able to click them. We're talking about the ones that you use on the trash, not the ones that you use on the boss.
Yeah.
And they do 30% of the mob's HP, and they scale with dungeon level.
Yeah.
And so you're able to have like you're able to pull all the way up to the forge or not the forge master, but you're able to pull up to the second boss of the dungeon. Every single mob, instantly kill it with the chains, kill the second boss, and then pull everything like towards the forge master area, including like birds and whatnot, and insta kill all that with chains. And it just feels super weird.
So I have a sneaking suspicion that those chains are going to get target capped.
Target capped. I thought they were gonna get damage nerfed.
Well, you could do
I-
that too.
I don't know why they made the change when they did they not learn the lesson from like Necrotic Wake and Plaguefall where they didn't want the
Yeah.
dungeon power is just killing the trash for you. I don't know.
Did they ever
It's so weird.
specifically say that they didn't want that?
Oh yeah, they nerfed it.
They did
Did
nerf
you know
it, but
that-
I mean, Necrotic Wake was still pretty crazy. Even post nerfs, the weapons just did so much of the dungeon, even after the nerfs.
I think the craziest thing to me about the change is that you can like click the same skull several times and therefore get like even more chains out of it. Which is
Yeah.
like this definitely shouldn't be a thing.
I think that they're going to change it somehow, whether it's damage nerf, target cap, not being able to click it multiple times, something.
Yeah.
So I would say that we should rate this dungeon, assuming that that's going to get changed.
Yeah.
'cause
Oh, okay. Well, I
We'll
rated
pretend the chains aren't what they are right now. I think that's a valid.
I think the dungeon is much better if
approach.
you're not playing the chains.
Okay, yeah, I agree.
like mechanically, aesthetically, in terms of like how you pull the mobs and everything, how does the dungeon feel minus the chains? Because I personally, I think the bosses are kind of cool. I don't love Magma Tusk. I still think that that's a pretty bad boss in my opinion. But outside of that, I think the rest of the bosses are pretty cool.
Yeah, I like it. I like the dungeon. I think it's good. I think the Warden's Blazing Slash does probably too much damage. It's kind of like the Ice Cutters and Azure Vaults, but I think it's a good dungeon. I would put it at a B.
I'm okay with B.
Tunnels, how do you like seeing as we are talking about it minus the chains? Where would you put it and why?
Yeah, I'd probably put it in B. I think with the chain stuff, I think it's like C because I'm like pretty asleep on all of the trash. Yeah, because you're
Yeah.
you're playing a mini game. You're not playing the dungeon.
Yeah.
With the chains, I would almost rate it at D. Like, those
Yeah,
chains are just so
It's so
stupid.
bad. Yeah.
But
Okay,
let's put it at
we're
B.
It also
just pretending-
trivializes the timer.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, in the future, hopefully when this video releases, they probably maybe perchance have fixed it. Hopefully. We'll
There-
put it in B.
we'll see.
Okay, next up is a dungeon that when I looked at this image, I was like, huh? But it's actually Uldaman. So Uldaman, A Legacy of Tyr. one of the new dungeons coming through here with that little corner way. And yeah, vibe check on that dungeon.
Nerf, you want to take this one first?
As a tank, I don't like the dungeon. Like there's just a bunch of bleeds. Like the Crocolisk in the beginning, their bleed does too much damage, and it probably happens too often. And then the snake guys, which you can like bite, hurts. I think the bosses are kind of cool.
That's what I was gonna say.
But-
Yeah.
Mm,
I don't like the trash. I think the dungeon is also a little bit long,
yeah.
or it feels long at least. Like the timer doesn't feel long, but there's just a lot of running, and you're just running the whole time.
I think for me, Nerf kind of nailed it with like I think the bosses. This is probably the dungeon that has some of the most interesting bosses of the season. But I think the trash isn't. Even though you get a lot of really unique trash mobs in here, I don't think the trash itself is anything that's like super special or super interesting to write home about. Considering how narrow the corridors are and like it's supposed to be a cave after all, it's not that bad. But it's not as bad as it realistically could be. But I don't think there's a lot that's like super compelling with the trash for me.
Yeah. I mean, there is a lot of unique trash in terms of like unique mobs, but in terms of
Yes.
like unique abilities, it doesn't really feel like there's much of anything. Most of the trash kind of feels like the same thing, just with slight variations.
It's at least deadly. Like you can
Yeah.
you can wipe in
It's
this
definitely
key.
dangerous
Yeah.
for sure. There's a lot of parts of this key that are dangerous. I like the voice acting and the dwarves. I like that part of it. I think the bosses are unique, which I'm also a fan of. In terms of like mechanically, every boss is pretty unique and has pretty cool mechanics. From a healer perspective, I do still think Bromok is a little overtuned, as well as the bleed on Sentinel, and I don't like that Emberon heavily favors a comp with Mass Dispel, as well as Last Boss, actually. Both Emberon
Yeah.
and Last Boss benefit
Yeah.
from Mass Dispel a huge amount, which is something we brought up in our last video, but not
I
a
think-
big fan of that.
I think this dungeon Halls of Infusion being really Mass Spell dependent is not great.
Yeah, also the trash before Last Boss, Mass Dispel 2. I
Nah,
didn't
skip that
even think
shit.
about that.
We skipped this.
I mean, sure, ideally, but
Yeah.
a lot of groups will not be able to.
I think it's something that's like particularly recognizable in weeks like this, where we have like the dispel affix, and it's just like you only have so much to go around, and suddenly like all of the groups are like, oh yeah, we want like ideally 2 DPS classes that can also dispel. There's just too much going on. Yeah.
To me,
I
I put
could
this
talk
in.
for days about Afflicted, but let's
Oh
avoid
my
that
God.
discussion.
Leading us away.
To me, I put this in B. I think that this dungeon is okay.
I would lean higher. I would put it closer to A.
Really,
I don't know. I like
the bosses are cool.
the bosses are cool. I like the aesthetics and the RP, and I think I think there's a lot of AoE trash, which is nice. The only thing I'm not a big fan of is like some of the tuning. But I mean, I think if they tuned some of those things, that this dungeon would be really, really good.
Wow. Okay. Nerf. Where would you put it?
I would put it at a B. Like I had my reservations about this dungeon before the season started, but it turned out better than expected. But I think it's a B. I don't think it's quite the same as what do we put, Brackenhide and Freehold at A.
Yeah.
I'll concede a B.
Yeah, okay. I'd agree with the B because it's so much running. Just like that alone. It's but okay, we'll put it in B. And
At least it has better checkpoints, though.
It does. Oh, it does. Yeah, the porting is really nice in that dungeon. Okay, next up is a dungeon that I probably ran like about 1,000, 2,000 times maybe, and I'm going back in Demon Hunter Dreams. It's Underrod, and I think many people like this one a lot.
I mean,
Yeah, I think it's just a very easy dungeon.
This might be controversial, but I don't like it because it's too easy.
Okay, so this is actually my favorite dungeon.
Mhm.
But-
I was waiting for this.
but I'll preface it by saying I do think that both the timer needs a nerf and some of the like abilities themselves should probably be buffed. The dungeon is a little too easy. That is not why I like the dungeon necessarily. I think that the dungeon is just a well-made dungeon. I think the trash is good. I think the bosses are pretty good. I think that, like, for example, like Spore Collar is a way better version of what we had last season. What was that first boss in Vault called? Laymore?
Oh yeah.
I think he's just a way better design because like you have the ability to make up for other people's mistakes by like, you know, popping an immunity and soaking the things
Soaking it.
before it goes off, or, you know, there's a lot of agency to counter stuff. So I like that boss. Same thing with like last boss, although I do think again kind of a mass dispel thing, but the healer has a lot of agency with like where they pop their cooldowns and like how they handle if you know, extend and don't get a clear due to like a phase shift. I think Krogma has always been a fun healer boss, but like and a difficult one, but I think that I don't know what happened with tuning, but his tantrum feels way easier than it should.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would like to see that buffed. I'm not sure what exactly happened with that.
For me, like the reason that I would put it a little bit, I would be leaning towards B, but I'm leaning towards B because I feel like I'm just asleep in this key perma because it's too easy. There's nothing
Really?
Well, I mean, there's nothing that feels deadly here, man. Like, what are you dying
I mean,
to?
what about the blood swarmer that just like will delete you?
It doesn't delete you anymore. You press Sparkskin and you tank it.
Okay, Druid.
Okay, but
Yeah, it's like,
but, like,
haha.
okay,
All right, Boomkin, try being a shadow priest
So-
or a mage, just sprinting for your life.
but like back in okay, so you're talking about cloth classes, but like back in BFA, one of the reasons that this dungeon was interesting is the first area of trash with like the matrons and whatnot was actually pretty challenging, and then on top of that, then you had the blood swarmers, like that blood swarmer area, which in conjunction with the kicks that were required on the lashers was actually very technically challenging with how you were routing through that area. And Kragmaw was dangerous, and they kind of have removed all three of those things, and they made a key that I like the dungeon itself. Like I think the mobs are designed well, but I just don't think that anything is going to kill you to the point where you're wiping in that dungeon, and I think it's just too easy where I just kind of get lulled to sleep.
Nerf,
You've fallen
what
asleep
would
in quite a
you-
few of these dungeons.
Some of these, dude,
Yeah.
some of these dungeons are
It
It seems to be a
bed.
trend.
Maybe you have
It seems like you might be
problem.
doing key levels too low.
Yeah.
You
Just go
guys
higher,
you guys
Kettles.
aren't
Just-
asleep in Underrot and Altheris and Halls of Infusion. I feel like I'm just perma asleep in this case.
I am
Not on, like,
engaged.
Not on like a super high key. The higher, I mean, it's infinitely scaling content, right?
Yeah, of course.
So-
At some point it becomes yeah. Let me try to get it under at 28, man.
okay,
Yeah.
well, I mean, even on 26, like those headhunters are doing massive.
Okay, the
amounts of damage
headhunters do
to
kind of
shoots.
frag for no reason. That is true.
The snares are pretty brutal if you don't have a freedom. The matrons charge like almost one shots if you're a clothy. The befouled spirits, Dark Omen is a huge dot that goes on someone.
on
You
a
still need to stop every single
Kettles, are
maggot.
you- are you
need to
giving up?
watch blood swarmers. The dot from the Death Speaker hits like a truck if you don't dispel instantly. If you pull double Death Speaker, you better have a Shadow Priest or a lot of dwarfs, or you're just gonna die. You can't let any cast go off from the Defilers.
Look what
I
you
think-
did. You got him started.
Yeah.
I think
his,
he's
just
his
saying.
thesis is ready.
I think
like,
he's- I
don't
think-
trigger him.
That's real anger. I don't know, man. Like
No.
I think that there's something inherently wrong whenever a dungeon is just too easy.
I mean, I'm not going to argue with you that Underrot isn't too easy. That was
Yeah,
the
yeah,
first thing I said. It definitely is too
Yeah.
easy. I'm just saying that I think there is still intricacies and difficulties to the dungeon.
Sure.
Do agree that it should be buffed, but I still think that it's one of the best designed M+ dungeons this season.
Okay,
Well,
we're
they didn't
gonna-
design
we're
it this
gonna
season,
go,
but you know what I mean.
Yeah, by like shot fire. I'm gonna say your name and you tell me which tier it belongs in. Ellismere,
S.
Nerf,
A.
Tettles.
I don't be.
Okay.
Sounds
Can
like
we
an A.
agree on one of the three?
We can agree on
It
A.
sounds
Just-
like an
just
A
A.
angle.
I think we can slam it in
Everyone
A.
happy
That's
with
pro-
that?
That's probably fine.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that we're probably all fine with that. Like, I think ultimately, I do think it's a good dungeon, and if they get the tuning of
Yeah.
this dungeon better, it moves up on my board.
I agree. I think a lot of it is a little bit of nostalgia. Like you know how it used to be. So it's like, oh, I wish it was like that because that was really challenging and like rewarding when you did it right. But yeah, I think it has new challenges, so it's kind of fair. But let's close that chapter, Underrot, and we're gonna go to the last dungeon that did have a lot of controversy going into this season. Yeah, Vortex Pinnacle.
Can we
How are we feeling about this one?
can we make an
D
F
tier.
tier? Is it
Yeah.
possible that we get? I don't even
If
think
we
it's in
could
the
I think we
increase-
can.
dude.
I don't
think
even
it's-
want to put it on the list.
It's not even the same tier as Halls of Infusion. Halls of Infusion is a much better dungeon than Vortex Pinnacle.
I would agree with that, honestly.
I don't know. Nerf, do you also think this dungeon is just god awful?
I think it's I think
I
it's
broke
pretty
it.
bad.
I
What
think
was
it's
the D
definitely
color? Right?
the worst dungeon. I think there are like a few, and I stress a very few redeeming qualities about the dungeon. But I think
Yeah.
in general, like if you were to go like pack by pack, like okay, first area of the dungeon, absolutely miserable. The Mistrals with their cloud guard and their AoE, it's both awful for ranged and melee. The Gust Soldier double pack is miserable if you
So-
don't have double dispels
Oh, it's such a
because the
bad
dot
mob.
just hits insanely hard.
Yeah, and it
The-
gets randomly like 400% increase attack speed and just tries to kill you too.
The first boss is just very weird mechanically, and can't say I'm a big fan. And it's very just repetitive. It's like repetitive and bad mechanics, which I'm not a huge fan of. And the dodging is just so weird with the movement of the circles. The storm dragons are awful. I mean, they're good healer check, I guess, but they seem pretty overtuned for the key level.
The first boss is a
comparison.
crime, by the way, of this dungeon.
Oh, yeah.
That guy is so bad. Like having to dodge. Okay, they went with this theme that it happens in a couple of dungeons, but the theme of like slow moving orbs, the fact that they move on, like it's not that they move, but it's that they move in a really weird, like jank way, and
They're
sometimes we'll just
completely random.
yeah, they're not random. They move clockwise around the room, but it's like they will just like pivot and turn at a seemingly random time, and it's just like that is so cringe. And then on top of it, it's supposed to be like a healer check, but there's actually no healing if you press defensives correctly.
Yeah, but you could say that about a lot of bosses. To
Yeah,
be fair.
sure. I mean, that fight is really really bad. What do you guys think about
I mean,
the
it's
second
not
and
as
third
bad
boss?
as the second boss.
Okay.
Yeah, I think
Okay,
all
yeah,
of
the
the
second
bosses
boss
are
is
kind of
really bad
criminal.
overlaps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Second boss is probably my least favorite boss I've ever played in any M+ dungeon ever, and I played in Shadowlands. So,
Do you ever remember Siege of Paralis, man?
oh god, actually, the bosses were like the least awful part of Siege, in my opinion.
Dude, that last Vic Goth, the least favorite boss of all time, #1 worst.
Was that the
boss.
last boss?
Yeah, that guy is
Yeah, that's the
awful.
last boss.
Oh yeah, that boss was pretty bad.
Okay,
you're
anyways,
not wrong.
but yeah, like I think that there's just like so much wrong with the trash too. I mean, we could go on about it forever. Like on Fortified, what are those the mobs that do the crush? The Adepts, I want
What?
to say is what they are.
You're talking about the Executors?
Do they do the
In the
Executors
last
the one that do
area?
the AoE? Yeah.
Yeah,
That
Yeah,
is just
yeah,
right
yeah.
before last
Executors.
boss. Yeah,
There's a pack with like double Executor. That stuff is
yeah,
so,
it's the very last pack.
that's so cringe. I actually don't mind the last
Well-
boss. I actually think the last boss is interesting.
See, I actually don't think that the double Executor pack is that cringe because Blizzard has done this we call them blueberries now.
Yeah.
But it's a very
Hmm.
common thing where right before like the last boss or like at some point in the dungeon, there will basically be two AoE mobs that are slightly desync, similar to the blueberries comes from the Void dudes in Shadow Moon Burial Grounds before the last boss. You could also look at Oldemon with the two guards right before the last boss area that do the big AoE crush. The Executors in this area, they're kind of all over the place these days. It's become kind of a theme. I don't necessarily think it's bad. It just like they basically want something punishing on Fortified for healers to have to deal with. And I think that that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
I do think the pack might be a little overtuned. I will, especially on Fortified. Although, like, if you have Lust, then it's fine. But then not having Lust for last boss, even on Fortified, is a bit of a crime.
Yeah.
But that's because of the bosses, the way it is. No?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's definitely due to the way he spawns his ads and how frequently.
I don't mind the last boss in here, and I don't mind like lust timings and whatnot. I definitely have a particular issue though with the first, second boss, and then a lot of the trash mobs.
I think the biggest problem with the second and third boss in this dungeon is just the overlaps. Second boss,
Yeah.
especially, absolutely
Yeah.
miserable boss if you get bad overlaps, which you will multiple times throughout the fight. And just like having to be stuck with that giant dot that also reduces your haste, it's just like, I don't know, it's severely punishing. And also the fact that like, even if you're facing the winds the correct direction, but you're not facing the boss the right way, you still get the debuff. And it's like for healers that may just need to plant and not worry about damage for a second, or like which direction the boss is, like, and just want to face away for a minute to get healing and clear their debuff. It's really cringe that we can't do that. We literally have to like run across the boss, especially when he like breathes at the same time. And it's, I don't know. There's so many bad overlaps on that boss. And then
Yeah.
obviously last boss, same thing. Like when you have an ad spawning and you get the chain lightning, like that person better have a massive defensive or they're just going to die, you know, which isn't super engaging.
Okay, so
I-
we all agree with like the black F tier, yes?
Yeah,
Like,
that thing's awful.
It's,
Yeah.
it's burned ash. No one goes there. Just looking over all of the dungeons, is there anything just like by seeing it now you would like to change or like, actually, like,
It's sad we didn't get any dungeon in S tier.
yeah, me too. But they're all like, you know, they have potential, and it's like,
I think they're fun. Like I think that
there
this,
yet?
I would say overall this season's actually been a lot of fun to play.
Yeah, I would agree. I think I'm having more fun this season than I was in season 1. I think a lot of that though is not necessarily due to dungeons, but it's more because of affixes. Aside from Afflicted Week, we don't talk about Afflicted Week. Like affixes in general have been reduced enough that you can actually kind of just enjoy the dungeons now instead of most of your concentration in like, I don't know. Before it just felt like you were doing affixes and then a side of dungeons. Now it feels like you're doing dungeons with some affixes, which I like a lot more.
Yeah, I think like overall we're ranking these based off like their relative placement to one another and just like some of the problems that the dungeons have. That's not always indicative of like how much fun we're having like playing
Yeah.
the keys.
Absolutely. Agreed.
I think that's everything. Yes. That's my first time recording one of those videos. I hope that's everything. If not, you have to tell me.
Mix, we need an outro. Is this
Yeah.
the outro?
Always need an
Yeah.
outro.
Is this the really
I
awkward
mean-
outro?
So yeah, if you enjoyed this video, subscribe to the channel and leave a like, and we're gonna see you in the next one.